When we normally look at global economics, there is this baseline expectation of rationality.
Right, like cause and effect.
Exactly. We want to believe the world operates like a massive, highly complex, but ultimately logical engine. I mean, if a fire breaks out in the engine room, you expect the warning lights on the dashboard to just immediately start flashing red.
Sirens blare, the machine forcibly slows down to address the crisis. It is supposed to be legible.
Yeah, smoke equals fire. Physical destruction equals market panic. It's just a clean equation.
And it's deeply comforting to us, frankly.
Hmm.
We desperately want our global financial dashboards to accurately reflect physical reality.
But then you step into the current geopolitical landscape, specifically looking at global energy, the Middle East, and the flow of international trade. And suddenly you realize that dashboard is just completely shattered.
Oh, it's beyond shattered. We are looking at a global scenario right now that is, honestly, a massive, terrifying contradiction.
It really is. And that is exactly what we are unpacking for you today on this deep dive.
It is the absolute definition of cognitive dissonance on a macroeconomic scale. I mean, the physical inputs are simply not matching the financial output.
So true. We are taking you through a truly dense, fascinating, and frankly, provocative interview transcript today featuring macroeconomic and geopolitical analysis from Jeffrey Curry.
And our mission here is really to unravel this massive paradox that he presents in the text.
Right, because right now, according to Curry's analysis, energy infrastructure in the Middle East is literally burning.
Literally on fire.
Major global shipping lanes are effectively paralyzed. The physical flow of oil is under siege. And yet, if you look at the price of oil, the literal lifeblood of that entire region and the global economy, it is sitting at historic lows.
It makes no sense. We're talking about West Texas Intermediate, or WTI crude, dropping below $70 a barrel.
So the core question we are asking you to explore with us today is, how on earth is that statistically, mathematically, and physically possible?
It's a question that forces us to look far below the surface. I mean, we have to look under the hood of the entire global financial system.
Algorithmic trading, historical power structures, modern warfare, all of it.
Yeah, but before we dive into the mechanics of all that, we really need to set a very clear foundation with you, the listener.
Good point. Because the analysis we are guiding you through today makes some incredibly heavy, highly controversial claims.
Extremely heavy. We are talking about allegations that touch the absolute highest levels of global power.
Curry's analysis touches on the direct actions of multiple U.S. administrations. He explicitly names both former President Trump and the Biden administration.
It delves into alleged covert foreign intelligence operations, too, involving Ukraine, Russia, Iran, and the Houthis.
And it discusses deliberate market manipulation at the highest levels of government. So we just want to be explicitly clear right out of the gate. Our role here is solely as your analytical guides.
Exactly. We are here to impartially unpack the arguments and the data presented in this specific interview. We are not endorsing these viewpoints.
We are absolutely not taking any political sides here.
And we are not independently validating the claims made about any administration or sovereign nation. We are simply mapping out the architecture of Curry's arguments, so you can understand how these massive puzzle pieces supposedly fit together.
Perfectly said. We are just the messengers, handing you the blueprint of this incredibly complex geopolitical theory. So rather than giving you some dry table of contents for how we're going to tackle this, let's just drop right into the physical reality on the ground.
Let's talk about this world on fire.
Because according to the interview, the sheer scale of the attacks on energy infrastructure happening right now is staggering. We are not talking about isolated lone wolf incidents here.
No, the text details a massive multi-front assault. For instance, he brings up a tanker recently hitting a mine in the Strait of Hormuz.
And we've got Saudi Aramco infrastructure under heavy, coordinated bombardment. Specifically, the Abqaiq facility, which, for those who don't know, is a massive critical nerve center for the global oil puzzle.
It is the crown jewel. And the text says it was hit just hours before this interview took place, alongside a chemical processing plant, struck by drones, launched by Iraqi and Houthi factions.
And what's truly fascinating here, and where that cognitive dissonance really starts to take root, is the severe disconnect between the physical evidence of these attacks and the official state narratives.
Oh, this part is wild because Curry points out that Riyadh, the Saudi government, has been aggressively denying that some of this severe damage ever even happened.
Right. The official line is often that these drone attacks were intercepted or, that they just hit empty desert or were largely ineffective.
But the reality from the sky says otherwise.
Exactly. Curry notes that satellite imagery tells a completely different, undeniable story. Independent eyes in the sky confirm that vital fuel depots are visibly destroyed.
Oil processing infrastructure is just wrecked. I mean, he specifically points to another major facility, the Jazan refinery, which has reportedly been burning for 48 hours straight.
With operations completely halted. I mean, you cannot hide a burning refinery from a satellite.
You really can't. The text mentions they were pummeled by drones and missiles 3 days prior. So you have a massive refinery burning for days, fuel depots turning to ash, and Abqaiq hit again.
And it's not contained to just the Arabian Peninsula either. Curry breaks down how this is a deeply interconnected, multi-front crisis.
Right, we are seeing major simultaneous disruptions in the Bab al-Mandab Strait, which is the critical choke point for everything moving through the Red Sea.
We are seeing disruptions in the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, too.
And on top of all that, Russian domestic refining capacity is taking direct, crippling hits.
So if we pull back and look at the whole board, you are witnessing the simultaneous threatening of almost every major artery of global energy supply.
Hormuz, Bab al-Mandab, the Black Sea, the Caspian, and the Russian domestic network. Historically speaking, losing or even just threatening this percentage of overall global supply.
It would send the commodity markets into an absolute unmitigated frenzy.
Exactly. Prices should be through the roof.
Right. And this brings me to my analogy. Because I was reading this transcript and trying to visualize how bizarre this market reaction actually is.
Let's hear it.
It is essentially like watching every major highway connecting to your city get shut down by massive, catastrophic pileups.
Okay.
The North Bridge has collapsed, the South Tunnel is completely flooded, the Eastern Highway has a massive toxic chemical spill.
A total gridlock nightmare.
Exactly. But then you open up your GPS app on your phone and the map is glowing perfectly green. It says traffic is flowing smoothly, no delay.
You assume the app was broken.
You would, and that is exactly what Curry is pointing out about the price of West Texas Intermediate crude. With all of this widespread destruction, WTI was sitting below $70 a barrel.
And he notes that before these regional conflicts really escalated, it was actually sitting higher, in the high 60s.
So we're looking at a scenario of historically low prices amidst historically high geopolitical risk. How is the GPS map still green? Why isn't the market panicking?
Well, this raises a vital point about market psychology and the underlying, often invisible mechanics of how commodities are actually traded.
Because it's not just a glitch.
No, Curry offers a very specific technical theory here. It's not that the market is blind.
Yeah.
It's not that traders don't see the fires burning on satellite imagery.
Yeah.
It's that the humans and the institutions participating in this market have been, as he describes it, severely beaten up by volatility.
I really want to push on that phrase, beaten up by volatility. For someone listening right now who doesn't trade oil futures every morning, what is the actual mechanism there? Why does volatility make traders ignore a burning refinery?
It comes down to how risk is priced into a commodity. In a normal environment, when geopolitical tensions rise, you typically see what's called a risk premium.
Okay.
That premium gets immediately baked into the price of oil. Buyers get nervous that there won't be enough supply in a month or two, so they're willing to pay extra right now for oil that will be delivered in the future.
Just to guarantee they actually have it.
Exactly. This anxiety creates a specific shape on the forward curve, which is just the chart showing the pricing of oil contracts over time. Usually, fear of the future drives those future prices up.
But Curry points out that right now, that risk premium is totally inexplicably absent. In fact, the forward curve actually went down during some of these recent rallies.
The text mentions that people are just completely unwilling to buy into the narrative of a shortage until they actually physically see the shortage at the terminal.
It's shifted into a strict seeing is believing market.
Precisely. And there's a mathematical indicator for this psychological exhaustion, which Curry discusses. It's the relationship between backwardation and contango.
Oh, this is a great concept to unpack for the listener.
Yeah. So in a normal market where everyone expects a massive geopolitical disruption and a future shortage of oil, the price of oil for future delivery is higher than the current spot price.
Because everyone is hedging their bets.
Right. That market state is called contango. It reflects a fear of tomorrow. But Curry notes that the market right now is in backwardation.
Meaning those future prices are actually lower than the current prices.
Exactly. That mathematical reality proves that the risk premium is just not being factored in by the people writing the checks.
The traders are essentially calling the geopolitics bluff. They are saying, look, I don't care how many drones you launch, show me the empty barrels before I pay a premium.
Yes. And Curry highlights how this creates a brutal, vicious cycle.
Hmm.
High volatility, where prices swing wildly up and down every day based on news headlines with no clear, sustained trend.
It makes it incredibly difficult for speculators and institutional investors to manage risk.
Or to make any money.
Yeah.
So what do? They take their capital and they leave the market entirely. They go trade something safer.
But when that capital leaves, you get lower liquidity.
And lower liquidity, in turn, makes the market even more volatile.
Hmm.
Because when there are fewer participants buying and selling, every single trade that does happen has a disproportionately larger impact on the price.
It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy of instability and paralysis. So the market is just paralyzed, bleeding out liquidity, totally refusing to react to the reality on the ground. But this market paralysis leads directly to a massive geopolitical question.
Which is?
If the physical flow of oil is this violently threatened and the Middle East is this inherently unstable and the market doesn't even seem to care anyway, why doesn't the United States just leave?
The withdrawal scenario.
Yeah. The text explicitly discusses this, particularly looking at the possibility of a pragmatic administration, perhaps under Trump, looking at the bill and deciding to just wash their hands of the Strait of Hormuz.
Right, why not let regional powers like Iran and Oman manage their own backyard?
And the U.S. can just focus on domestic issues, secure its own borders, and save billions.
And that question pulls us back through 80 years of economic history. Because according to Curry's analysis, the United States walking away from the Middle East is not just a strategic military retreat.
It's much bigger than that.
It would be the deliberate demolition of the entire financial architecture of the modern world.
We really need to spend some time unpacking this, because Curry leans heavily into the historical context of what he calls the grand bargain.
It is so crucial.
And I think for you listening right now, understanding this bargain is the absolute key to understanding why a drone strike in the Saudi desert theoretically affects the interest rate you pay on your credit card or your mortgage.
It is the invisible thread connecting global military power to domestic personal finance.
So let's trace it back. Curry takes this entire paradigm back to a very specific moment. December 1945, the end of the Second World War and the establishment of the Bretton Woods Agreement.
He explains that before 1945, the geopolitical rules of the game were brutally simple. The victor of a major war became a sprawling empire, and they simply took physical control of the territories they conquered.
Right, the traditional historical empire model. The Romans, the British, we won the war, we occupied the land, your stuff is now our stuff.
They extracted resources by military force. But the United States, emerging from World War II as the undisputed dominant power, did the exact opposite of traditional empire building.
Through newly created institutions like the World Bank, the U.S. actually funneled massive amounts of money into devastated nations, even former enemies.
To help them rebuild their economies and infrastructure. But, as Curry sharply outlines, this wasn't an act of pure altruism.
Not at all.
It was a calculated, brilliant trade. The grand bargain was struck. The U.S. would use its massive, unparalleled Navy and military force to protect global trade networks and keep the sea lanes open for everyone.
Free trade guaranteed by American guns.
In exchange for this protection, the rest of the world agreed to something monumental. They agreed to use the U.S. dollar as the global reserve currency, effectively recycling all that global trade through the financial system in New York.
And the most important commodity being shipped across those American-protected sea lanes was, of course, oil.
Exactly.
The text notes that this post-war period was the first time in human history that global supply chains became heavily dependent on resources extracted from places that were incredibly far away from where they were consumed.
Oil became the most strategically vital piece on the global chessboard.
So the U.S. Navy protects the tankers, the world has to buy the oil in U.S. dollars, and boom, the system is locked in.
Now, Curry makes a slight historical clarification here, noting that the petrodollar system, as we strictly define it, didn't fully solidify until 1971.
When Richard Nixon completely took the U.S. off the gold standard.
Right. Untethering the dollar from physical gold and tying its value intrinsically to global oil demand and Saudi cooperation. But the foundational architecture, the U.S. acting as the armed guarantor of free trade in exchange for total currency dominance, was set in stone at Bretton Woods in 1945.
And that specific bargain has held the global economy together for 8 decades.
It has.
Okay, but let's make this real. Let's talk about how this impacts a listener.
Yeah.
Because terms like reserve currency status and Bretton Woods can easily sound like dry academic
They
jargon.
definitely can.
But Curry uses a brilliant, tangible example to illustrate the massive financial benefit of this system. He talks about Switzerland.
Yes. The concept of the exorbitant privilege.
The exorbitant privilege, it's such a great phrase. So Curry tells us to look at mortgage rates in Switzerland right now.
Because of the massive anxiety in the global markets, wealthy individuals and institutions all over the world are flooding their capital into Switzerland.
Because the Swiss franc is historically viewed as an incredibly safe haven. It's a fortress currency.
And because all that foreign money is relentlessly flooding into Swiss banks, it drives down the cost of borrowing for the Swiss.
Curry notes that right now, a 30-year fixed mortgage rate for a citizen in Switzerland is 50 basis points.
And for those not deep in finance, a basis point is 0.01%.
So we are talking about a mortgage rate of 0.5%.
It is basically free money to buy a house purely because the rest of the world wants to park their money in your country.
And this is where we connect the dots back to the United States.
The U.S. enjoys this exact same exorbitant privilege, but on a massive, unfathomable global scale.
Because the entire world must acquire U.S. dollars in order to buy oil and engage in international trade, right?
Yes. A bottomless, never-ending ocean of foreign capital is constantly flooding into the U.S. financial system, primarily by buying U.S. Treasury bonds.
And this global demand for dollars artificially lowers interest rates in America and gives the United States a massive, almost limitless line of credit.
And the numbers Curry puts on this are staggering. He states that right now, purely because of this exorbitant privilege, the United States economy is able to spend 7% more than it actually produces.
7%.
The American standard of living is artificially inflated by 7% because the rest of the world is subsidizing our debt to access our currency.
And if you take that 7% away, if that exorbitant privilege evaporates because the dollar loses its status as the singular global reserve currency, Curry warns the consequences would be incredibly painful.
Specifically for the American consumer, the era of cheap credit that fuels American spending, the ability of the government to run massive deficits without immediate hyperinflation, all of it would just vanish.
So, understanding that massive economic reality, let's bring it back to the physical geography. What does this all mean for the Strait of Hormuz today?
Okay.
I want to play devil's advocate here, leaning into the scenarios explored in the text. What if a future U.S. leader, let's say Donald Trump, looks at this and decides to strike a purely pragmatic, business-minded compromise?
A transactional approach.
Exactly. What if they say, look, this is too expensive. We are blowing millions of dollars on interceptor missiles to shoot down cheap drones. Let's just let Iran and Oman manage the Strait of Hormuz.
Since they control the geography anyway.
Right. They can set up a toll system, a fee structure. The Saudis can pay off the Houthis to stop shooting. And the U.S. just packs up the Fifth Fleet and goes home to focus on the Western Hemisphere.
The text explicitly unpacks this idea.
So why does Curry argue that is an impossible fantasy?
Because he argues it presents a fatal historical contradiction. The grand bargain is an all-or-nothing proposition. If the United States voluntarily walks away from protecting the Strait of Hormuz, the most critical oil choke point on Earth, they have instantly demonstrated to the entire globe that they are no longer the unilateral protectorate of global trade.
Curry uses the example of China to illustrate this, right?
Yes.
Right.
Right now, when a Chinese state-owned enterprise moves a metric ton of copper from a mine in Chile across the Pacific Ocean to a port in Shanghai, it is not the Chinese Navy protecting those cargo ships.
And it is not the Chilean Navy.
No, it is the United States Navy guaranteeing the safety of that transit.
Right. And if the U.S. abandons the Middle East, the rest of the world, China, Europe, India, they are all going to look at that retreat and realize the deal is broken.
They will ask, wait a minute, why are we paying this invisible tax to the United States?
Why are we forced to use their dollar, buy their debt, and fund their exorbitant 7% privilege if they aren't even willing to keep the sea lanes open for us anymore?
Exactly. You cannot be the global hegemon if you are forced out of or choose to abandon a critical economic region.
Imagine the staggering precedent it would set if the United States Navy suddenly had to ask the Iranian government for permission to move the U.S. Fifth Fleet in and out of its own base in Bahrain.
It would be wild. Curry points out that this specific region, the Persian Gulf, has been a central hub of Western global hegemony for 200 years.
First dominated by the British Empire, and then seamlessly taken over by the Americans.
To suddenly ask a regional adversarial power for permission to navigate international waters would be a total humiliating reversal of 2 centuries of Western dominance.
The text frames it so starkly, too. Curry essentially challenges anyone to find another time in recorded history where the reigning global hegemon was forced out of a critical region, but somehow magically managed to remain the global hegemon.
It's an oxymoron.
If the U.S. decides to retreat and only care about the Western Hemisphere, reverting to a modern Monroe Doctrine approach, that might solve a short-term military and political headache.
But the second you do that, you instantly lose the justification for the global reserve currency.
The crack in the armor spreads, the petrodollar system collapses, and that 7% economic buffer that props up the American consumer is wiped out overnight.
Which is the core reason Curry concludes that the United States military, regardless of whether a Democrat or a Republican is sitting in the Oval Office, cannot simply walk away from the Middle East.
The domestic economic consequences of abandoning the grand bargain would be catastrophic.
Absolutely catastrophic.
Okay, so if we accept that premise, it brings us to a massive, mind-bending plot twist in Curry's analysis.
Here we go.
If keeping control of global trade is so existentially vital for the survival of the U.S. economy, and the Middle East is currently a literal powder peg threatening the flow of that trade,
What?
why does Curry claim that the U.S. government is actively suppressing the price of oil right now?
Right. If the physical reality is dire, why manipulate the dashboard to look green?
Exactly.
This is where Curry's narrative shifts gears, moving away from naval fleets and geopolitics and diving deep into the hidden plumbing of the financial markets themselves.
The ghost in the machine.
Yes. He introduces claims that the global oil market is currently subject to heavy, deliberate manipulation. And a vast majority of this manipulation isn't even being executed by human beings.
This part blew my mind. The text cites a report claiming that a staggering 70% of trading activity in these commodity markets is now entirely controlled by machines.
By quantitative trading models, or quants, and algorithmic systems.
And Curry completely validates this claim. He states he absolutely believes it's true, drawing directly on his own professional background working closely with a quant fund called Altus Partners. He knows how these systems operate from the inside.
And what's truly fascinating is how Curry describes the delicate, often chaotic interaction between these automated trading machines and the unpredictable actions of human political actors.
Oh, I have to bring in the Star Wars analogy he uses in the text, because it is the perfect way to visualize how algorithmic trading actually functions.
It really is perfect.
He compares algorithmic quant trading to R2-D2 flying Luke Skywalker's X-Wing fighter. In normal, stable market conditions, you absolutely want R2-D2 flying the ship. The machine is perfectly efficient.
It processes millions of data points instantly.
Exactly. It executes trades with zero emotional bias, and it manages the day-to-day fluctuations of the market infinitely better than any human ever could. Suddenly, Darth Vader enters the scene. And in Curry's analogy, Darth Vader represents a sudden, massive, unpredictable political intervention.
He gives examples from the recent past, like former President Trump suddenly taking to social media to announce sweeping new tariffs on a Saturday morning.
Or unexpectedly tearing up a memorandum of understanding with a foreign power.
Right. When these massive, illogical political shocks happen, the market goes chaotic.
Because the algorithms R2-D2 do not know how to process a tweet.
No, they don't have historical data for unprecedented political chaos. They panic.
They perform terribly in that kind of unquantifiable volatility. And that is exactly the moment when a human Luke Skywalker has to reach out, turn off the targeting computer, grab the manual controls, and fly the ship themselves.
So if we take that analogy and apply it to the current market, Curry is alleging that we are in an extended period where Darth Vader is constantly entering the scene.
Yes, and he specifically points fingers at aggressive, unprecedented government intervention designed explicitly to manipulate commodity prices downward.
Breaking the algorithm's ability to price risk normally.
Exactly. And Curry focuses heavily on the actions of the Biden administration here. And again, to be very clear, we are strictly reporting the claims made in his analysis, not taking a political stance.
Of course.
He alleges that the Biden administration deliberately drained the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, the SPR, down to dangerously low levels.
You were talking about pushing the nation's emergency stockpile down toward the 300 million barrel mark.
And the claim is that they did this specifically to flood the global market with artificial supply, thereby strong-arming the price of oil down regardless of the geopolitical fires burning in the Middle East.
Now, it's important to note that Curry is careful to contextualize this. He states that this isn't an entirely new partisan tactic. He acknowledges that the Trump administration utilized similar playbooks and market interventions to influence prices during their tenure as well.
The crucial difference right now, according to Curry, is the sheer overwhelming magnitude of the disruption.
Previous administrations might use these SPR tricks to keep the market stable just long enough to quietly replenish supplies during a minor temporary disruption.
But the current geopolitical crisis is so large and the physical threat so sustained that these incremental manipulations are, in his view, ultimately doing absolutely nothing to fix the underlying physical shortage of energy.
They're just masking it.
But I want to stop and ask the most important question here.
Okay.
Why? Why would the government intervene so aggressively? Why dangerously drain the country's strategic reserves to force oil prices down during a massive, escalating geopolitical crisis?
Yeah.
Is it just the classic political maneuver to keep gas prices cheap for voters ahead of an election?
According to Curry's analysis, it is about something much, much bigger and more structurally vital than the price of unleaded gas at the pump.
What is it?
It's entirely about the stock market. Specifically, it is about fiercely protecting the valuations of a very small, incredibly powerful group of companies.
A Mag 7.
Yes, the Magnificent Seven. Curry makes a direct mechanical connection between the price of a barrel of oil, the trajectory of global interest rates, and the trillion-dollar valuations of massive technology companies.
Okay, let's unpack this chain reaction step by step, because this is really the aha moment of the entire economic argument in the text.
It ties everything together.
Curry talks about the Mag 7, the tech behemoths like Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, and he throws the advanced space sector into the mix as well.
He explicitly mentions Elon Musk amassing a fortune that makes him a trillionaire through the astronomical valuation of companies like Tesla.
And Curry points out a terrifying statistic here. These highly specific tech sectors now make up an insane 40% of the entire United States stock market capitalization.
40% of the market rests on a handful of companies.
So how does a drone strike on an oil facility connect to Apple's stock price? As you said, we have to walk through the mechanics.
It all runs directly through the plumbing of interest rates.
Okay.
If the price of oil is allowed to skyrocket because of the genuine physical risks in the Middle East, the cost of transporting everything goes up.
When energy goes up, global inflation spikes.
And when inflation spikes, central banks, like the Federal Reserve, are structurally forced to keep interest rates high to combat that inflation.
And high interest rates are absolute lethal poison for massive tech valuations.
Because if we look at how these companies are valued, it's often based on models that heavily weight future growth and cheap capital.
Right. If interest rates are at 5 or 6% because oil is at $100 a barrel, the mathematical models supporting those trillion-dollar valuations completely break down.
And their share prices come crashing to earth. The cost of capital becomes too expensive to justify the future multiples.
But Curry takes it one step further. He explains why the government cares so deeply about those specific share prices.
This is the kicker.
If those tech stocks crash, taking 40% of the market cap down with them, it utterly destroys U.S. tax receipts.
The federal government relies massively on the capital gains taxes and corporate revenues generated by that specific sector.
Curry explicitly argues that a catastrophic stock market crash driven by high interest rates is actually a far more immediate existential threat to the functioning of the U.S. government than the underlying price of oil itself.
He even goes so far as to theorize that the bizarre political theater we see in the Middle East is tied to this.
He suggests that recent sudden pauses in hostilities, random announcements of ceasefires or de-escalations that seem to come out of absolutely nowhere on a Saturday afternoon.
They were highly likely orchestrated by political actors specifically to force the price of oil down ahead of market openings.
The goal isn't necessarily peace. The goal is protecting those share price valuations and the tax receipts they generate.
In this view, they don't fundamentally care about the oil itself. They care about maintaining the illusion of stability to protect the stock market.
It is a remarkable theory. The idea that a drone strike on a Saudi refinery is intimately mathematically tied to the stock price of an electric vehicle company in California.
And that the government is pulling every lever possible to keep that connection from detonating.
It is wild. But just when you think you have a handle on the macroeconomic theory, Curry's analysis takes a very sharp, very dark left turn into the actual physical tactics of the wars currently being fought.
The financial war is just a shield masking the reality on the ground.
Let's look at the merging of these global theaters, specifically how the war in Ukraine and the escalating tensions in the Middle East are allegedly bleeding into one another.
Completely fundamentally changing the nature of modern asymmetric warfare.
This section of the transcript contains perhaps the most shocking revelations of the entire interview.
We are shifting from the invisible world of algorithmic trading to very physical, very surprising ground operations.
I have to admit, I was genuinely reading this part twice to make sure I understood the claim.
That's a lot to take in.
The host of the interview brings up a narrative that the war in Ukraine and the conflicts in the Middle East are no longer separate, isolated events. They are actively merging into one massive, cohesive theater of operations.
To support this, the source text points directly to striking statements made by the Iraqi National Security Advisor.
Now, the text spends some time giving us vital context on this specific individual to establish his credibility for you, the listener.
Right, let's look at his resume exactly as it's presented in the text. He was appointed to his position in 2026.
And he is described not as a political firebrand, but as a balanced, technocratic judge and a highly respected legal expert.
He has a deep history working within the Iraqi judiciary, the Electoral Commission, parliamentary advising, constitution drafting, and even UN accountability work.
He's met extensively with both high-level U.S. officials and Iranian officials. He pushes for Iraq's openness to the world, he advocates fiercely for a state monopoly on weapons, and he wants constructive international ties.
The text explicitly and repeatedly notes that he does not lean pro-Iran, nor does he lean pro-U.S.
He is presented as a highly credible, remarkably neutral observer of the chaos in his own country.
And what does this highly credible, neutral observer explicitly claim? The text quotes him, stating that Ukrainian intelligence cells are currently actively operating throughout Iraq.
I just want to pause and repeat that because it sounds like the plot of a spy thriller. Ukrainian intelligence operatives on the ground in Iraq.
The claim goes much further than just their presence, too.
The allegation is that these Ukrainian intelligence cells are deliberately carrying out false flag attacks on sovereign Iraqi facilities and then intentionally falsely attributing those attacks to various other militant factions in the region.
Furthermore, Curry's analysis notes allegations that Ukrainians are actually actively striking Iranian boats in the region.
The source mentions that people operating in the geopolitical space are absolutely terrified by the implications of this.
The working theory is that Ukraine, under President Zelensky, and aligned neoconservative elements are actively trying to orchestrate events to drag Iran fully into the Ukraine war.
By provoking Iran in the Middle East, they effectively merged the two conflicts into one massive global theater, forcing the West to engage more aggressively.
The text even mentions a recent interview involving Laura Loomer and Zelensky as part of how this specific explosive narrative is suddenly bubbling up into mainstream media discussions.
And again, to be crystal clear, we are impartially reporting the claims presented in the text. But the strategic implications of a nation under siege opening a covert second front in the Middle East are staggering.
If we logically follow the flow of international support, this merging of theaters makes a grim tactical sort of sense.
Curry asks the fundamental question here. Where is Iran getting the highly advanced weaponry it's currently using?
They didn't just invent cutting-edge ballistic missile technology overnight while under massive international sanctions.
Common sense and the specific technical markings found on the weapons recovered from these strikes suggest that Russia is actively providing the advanced technology and reinforcements to Iran.
And it's not just Iran, it's the Houthis as well.
Curry points out that the Houthi rebels in Yemen were allegedly receiving precise intelligence data directly from Russia, allowing them to accurately target commercial tankers in the Red Sea.
Or, he posits, maybe they got that intelligence from the Chinese or the Iranians.
But the overarching point is clear. Massive global powers like Russia and China are providing the high-level intelligence, the satellite data, and the advanced technology, giving themselves plausible deniability, while their smaller proxies execute the devastating physical damage.
This dynamic raises an incredibly important point about how the fundamental nature of war has changed in the 21st century.
Curry observes that we are no longer living in an era where you absolutely need to be a massive trillion-dollar global superpower to exert massive military influence.
Yes, he talks about the rise of what he calls the Middle Kingdom.
The thesis is that you can be a mid-sized regional power, but if you have access to cheap, disposable technology like $1,000 drones and guided missiles provided by a larger patron ally,
You can create absolute paralyzing chaos for a traditional superpower. You don't need aircraft carriers if you have a swarm of cheap drones.
and this reality of asymmetric warfare is having a profound, entirely unexpected impact on the global technology sector and the energy transition.
Curry notes a massive, urgent pivot within the military-industrial complex toward advanced metals and battery technologies.
I found this part absolutely fascinating. Cree points out that traditionally, caring about battery efficiency and green energy was largely the domain of environmentalists.
It was an ecological concern.
But right now, today, it has become the #1 strategic focus for the highest levels of the military. Why the sudden shift?
Because of the brutally harsh physical realities of the modern battlefield. Curry explains the logistics of the U.S. military. They rely on massive, slow-moving military refueling ships and transport planes to keep their global operations running.
In this new era of asymmetric warfare, those multi-million-dollar floating gas stations are essentially sitting ducks for cheap, disposable enemy drones.
You have a massive vulnerability where a $2 billion ship can be critically disabled by a $2,000 piece of plastic and explosives.
So, the military is being forcibly driven to transition away from oil dependency on the battlefield, not to save the polar bears, but purely for basic military survival.
They desperately need advanced, high-capacity battery tech and localized renewable power grids so they don't have to rely on these massive, vulnerable, highly visible liquid fuel supply chains stretching across oceans.
The text mentions that people in the defense sector are quietly saying this conflict with Iran and its proxies is probably one of the most effective catalysts for renewable energy development in history.
Because green tech has suddenly become a dire, existential military necessity for Western survival.
It is a striking, almost ironic paradox. The violent war over the control of global oil infrastructure is the exact catalyst accelerating the technological obsolescence of oil in the military sector.
It really is.
Okay, so let's try to wrap our heads around this entire picture. We have burning refineries being ignored by the market.
We have an algorithmic trading shield artificially protecting the stock market to preserve tax receipts.
We have the alleged merging of global wars with Ukrainian spies in Iraq.
And we have cheap drones fundamentally rewriting how superpowers fight, accelerating a green military transition.
The obvious glaring question is, where does this all end? What is the actual objective?
What is most revealing about Curry's analysis is that even the highly connected, high-level individuals he references in the source material are deeply, fundamentally confused about the ultimate objectives of these conflicts.
He notes that he spent time calling multiple contacts across his network to get their perspectives, and the overwhelming consensus among the elites is sheer confusion.
There seems to be no clear, unifying strategic objective driving the chaos.
But he did outline two primary theories that he managed to piece together from his network. Let's break those down because they paint two very different pictures of our future.
Theory number 1, the Big Bang, or regime change.
Yes. This theory suggests that the current pause we occasionally see, or the seemingly measured attempts to control the escalation, are actually just a calculated smokescreen.
The theory posits that this pause is providing cover while massive, overwhelming U.S. military reinforcements are quietly moved into the region.
Curry notes that these massive reinforcements started flowing heavily into the theater about a week and a half prior to the interview taking place.
And the text includes a very specific, chilling behavioral detail to support this theory.
Curry mentions hearing compelling information that a lot of elites and high-net-worth individuals in Saudi Arabia are suddenly taking extended holidays right now.
When critical infrastructure like Abqaiq is getting routinely hit, the wealthy and powerful insiders are allegedly looking at the reality on the ground and deciding it is time to pack their bags and get out of the country for a while.
If the regional elites are fleeing and massive U.S. naval and air forces are steadily building up, the theory suggests that the ultimate goal of the West isn't just to play defense and secure the straits temporarily.
The goal might be a push for sweeping, violent regional regime change to permanently eliminate the asymmetric threats to U.S. hegemony.
Because, as we established in our discussion of Bretton Woods, the U.S. simply cannot afford to lose the Strait of Hormuz. The economic cost is too high.
Right, so that is theory one, fast, violent, decisive regime change to reset the board.
But there is a second theory presented in the source, which is perhaps even more grueling: long-term economic warfare.
This second theory suggests that we shouldn't hold our breath for a quick Hollywood-style resolution.
Instead, what we are watching is the beginning of a decades-long strategy of grinding economic warfare, fought entirely through expendable proxy fighters.
The operation could flare up for years, completely pause for a decade while both sides rebuild their stockpiles and economies, and then violently start again. It's a forever war of attrition.
And Curry gives a great, highly specific tactical example of this dynamic playing out right now.
The text mentions that Iran, specifically elements of the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, is attacking Kurdish proxy groups in the region on a daily basis.
Non-stop, relentless daily strikes. Why are they wasting ammunition on the Kurds?
Because the Iranians know full well that the Americans are planning to use those specific Kurdish groups as their own proxies to maneuver against Iranian interests.
Curry even cites a warning from an IRGC commander explicitly telling these factions not to make a move, heavily implying they will not let the U.S.-backed Kurds operate freely.
It is a slow, agonizing chess match fought with proxy lives.
Amidst all these wild theories, from algorithmic market manipulation to false flag operations in Iraq to shifting military energy grids, the host of the interview asks Curry a crucial, grounding question.
Essentially, amidst all this noise, what is the actual conclusion? What single data point should a rational observer actually be watching to know the truth?
And I absolutely love the answer because it cuts cleanly through all the geopolitical spin and the algorithmic market illusions.
Curry quotes one of his trusted contacts who said, "The only thing that matters are the ships coming out of the straits, and right now it's zero."
It is the ultimate reality check. Ignore the political theater. Ignore the diplomatic tweets. Ignore the stated military objectives.
Watch the hard, undeniable data of the physical oil flow.
If the massive tankers aren't moving through the choke points, the crisis is escalating and the global economy is bleeding, regardless of what the green lights on the financial dashboard say.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's take a collective breath and synthesize this massive, complex journey we've just taken you on.
We started by looking at the physical reality of burning Saudi refineries and totally disrupted sea lanes.
We explored how those very real physical fires threaten the foundational 80-year-old grand bargain of Bretton Woods, the exorbitant privilege of the U.S. dollar, and ultimately your personal access to cheap credit and a stable economy.
From there, we went behind the curtain to examine claims of massive algorithmic market manipulation, exploring the provocative theory that governments are draining strategic national reserves not to help consumers at the pump, but specifically to protect the trillion-dollar valuations of the Mag 7 tech stocks,
thereby protecting the U.S. tax receipts that keep the government functioning.
We then looked at the surreal, almost unbelievable tactical reality of the conflict itself.
Allegations of Ukrainian intelligence operating false flags in Iraq. Russia and China happily supplying the tech for asymmetric drone warfare.
And the deep irony of the U.S. military frantically rushing toward green battery technology purely to survive on a battlefield where oil supply chains are a fatal liability.
And why should you, the listener, care about all of this seemingly distant geopolitics?
Because Curry is arguing that the fundamental architecture of the global economy you rely on is actively fracturing.
The transition away from undisputed U.S. dollar hegemony isn't just an abstract academic theory for historians to debate. It's a messy, volatile, and potentially dangerous reality unfolding right now.
To drive this home, Curry compares our current geopolitical moment to the incredibly unstable period between 1920 and 1945.
Right. The text notes the historical timeline. From 1820 to 1920, the British Empire was the undisputed hegemon.
From 1945 to today, it's been the United States.
But in that gap, between 1920 and 1945, there was a massive power vacuum. There was no single global protectorate to enforce the rules of trade.
And the result of that vacuum was the total disintegration of global order, massive economic depression, and 2 catastrophic world wars.
Curry's ultimate warning is that we are actively heading toward a similar vacuum today, driven by structural economic forces that go far beyond any specific political leader.
The old paradigm, the grand bargain, is breaking under the weight of its own contradictions, and no one has a clear, agreed-upon answer for what replaces it.
Which brings us perfectly back to that broken dashboard we talked about at the very beginning of this deep dive.
The warning lights might be artificially disconnected, the algorithms might be forcing the gauges to read green, but the engine is definitely smoking.
And in the final moments of the transcript, Curry briefly mentions what might happen next, dropping a passing fascinating reference to things like stablecoins and physical gold.
Yes, he notes that while new digital currencies or alternatives might emerge to facilitate trade, they are currently mostly backed by the U.S. dollar system.
But if the dollar actually falls from its undisputed reserve status, Curry speculates we could see a rapid return to physical backing for currency.
He mentions the possibility of this driving the price of physical gold to unimaginable heights, perhaps $10,000 or $20,000 an ounce, as sovereign entities and massive institutions desperately scramble to find a new, incorruptible bedrock of value.
So after untangling all of this, we want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to mull over.
If Curry's analysis is correct, if the era of undisputed U.S. dollar hegemony truly is ending and the world is scrambling to find a replacement, perhaps digital currencies backed by physical gold soaring to unimaginable heights.
How will you, the individual, protect the value of your own life's work in a world where the grand bargain no longer exists?
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Stay curious, and we'll see you on the next one.